Hey guys, Olaf here from LSE. So today we're working on my own Dodge Magnum 2006. It's a V6 engine. It's the SE model, so it's a 2.7 liter. And I have close to 240,000 miles on it, and the head gasket blew in the way that I got overpressure in my coolant system to the point that actually the upper bleeder house exploded because of the overpressure. And first I was saying, not pointing really to the situation that I have a blown head gasket, so I first replaced the bleeder housing, what you saw in the videos before. If you're not, just check the other videos on the Dodge Magnum. I also thought that my cap on my coolant reservoir was faulty, so I replaced that as well. Not the case. Pressure still built up. The way I found it out was I was doing only very short runs, like 15 minutes or so, and I then released the pressure, and the pressure was already building up very high to the point that even on the bleed out valve I had air trapped in that area. And that was the first indicator where I knew, okay, how do I get air in there? The only way you get it is through a blown head gasket, where actually your cylinder worked its way into the situation that it actually goes to your through your gasket into the channel where your coolant is running next to your cylinder liner to cool actually your cylinders. And I found out later on, and we'll see it in the video, and this is a multi-part series, and it's pretty long winding, so I speed up this one here first, where I take the whole engine apart using 10mm sockets here, and you can really watch and see how exactly to do this yourself if you are ever into this situation. That's why it's so long and multi-part, so that somebody who's new to work with this car to actually learn how to work on it, especially for mechanics, it's very helpful. Because there are a couple things with the V6, and a lot of people say it's a bad engine. Actually, it's a pretty good, solid one on the newer ones. It was a bad one in the first 2004 and earlier series, but they fixed it when Chrysler took over. And so if you have it in a Magnum 6, 7, 8, or 9, that engine is relatively bomb-proof as long as you take care of it. So as you see, I took the air intake housing completely off. There's your couple additional hoses and connectors to it, which you have to disconnect. But most you can get with a 10mm socket. And then there are two bolts on the side where there's a 8mm nut holding it on. Make sure that you put those somewhere in a safe space. So now you can see actually me getting the fuel rail disconnected because I want to make sure that all electricity, and I still had the battery hooked up, so make sure you guys, when you work on cars like that, and disconnect your batteries first off. I had the battery on for two reasons, which is a bad situation for the Magnum in general. In the rear, in the trunk, my trunk is fully loaded, so I didn't have easy access to the battery to disconnect it. And so I started the work completely with electricity being still running to the engine, which later on turned out to be a very bad move. I'll get into that when we get there, but I pretty much shortened the starter to the gasket, which goes to the exhaust manifold, multiple times, and shocked myself twice. Not nice, so I highly recommend disconnect your battery. Otherwise you might ignite a fire if there's some gasoline in that area as well. Anyhow, so the car has 240,000 miles, somewhere in that range. I would have to look at the odometer to know exactly. But now I'm tearing pretty much everything apart. On the top there's in the rear of the head, on the head cover, there's an 8mm nut you have to take off, and then the rest is all 10mm nuts. Just take it off, put them all aside in boxes. So what I did, since I have a mechanical background and also a racing background from early racing, so I'm very familiar with engines in general. So I took the cover off, it's all 10mm bolts, and just use hand tools. Very rarely I use power tools because you're dealing with an aluminum block. So when you're doing with aluminum block or plastic, that stuff can easily crack, and when you do it with a hand tool, you can actually feel if it's actually the bolt moving or if the bolt is still from the thread not turning and it's only the head, which would mean if you didn't apply more pressure, you snap off the top of your bolt, and then you have the thread stuck in your block or in your cylinder block. Not a good idea. So always loose it up by hand is my highly recommendation on that. Once you have it cranked loose and it's moving, sure enough, go ahead, use the power tool and speed up the process. But because it's aluminum, I highly recommend do not use power tools to crank something loose or to crank it back in place, which is another big problem. A lot of mechanics just use the impact gun and just boom, 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 get them in place, and then they're over tightened. There are specs what you have to follow, and that's where there's a handbook available from Haynes, for example, or also the mechanic handbook from Chrysler. Now it's Dodge because they split a little bit off. So you have your Ram side, which is the former Dodge side, and now you have your Chrysler side. This is prior to that split, so Dodge, Chrysler, and Daimler was at that time in 06 when this one was manufactured, still one company. But here you can see it, I'm using the power tool just to get all the screws quickly out, so I just don't take forever. You see the dipstick here in the front. The dipstick itself is held only with a 13mm bolt, which also holds your... Now I have to think about it. It's the upper, so it should be your steering pump. I think it's your steering fluid pump. Yeah, it's the steering fluid pump for the power steering, which has two 13mm bolts going into your cylinder head block to hold on, so you have to remove those. But you don't have to remove anything else there other than pretty much that, and then you can take your cover off. And here in a few you're gonna see that the whole video going back to normal speed. There you see me, the 13mm goes out right now. So watch and enjoy and judge for yourself what the engine really looks like. After I take this cover off, you're going to see here close up what it looks like. Doesn't look too bad. I'll show the inside as well. So watch and enjoy. So you guys tell me, 240,000 miles. I don't see really any sludge on this engine whatsoever. Only thing I see here is down here a little bit caked on, so there's a minor one. This engine was running pretty much all its years on full synthetic, most of the time on AMS oil, and sometimes on other brands, but always on full synthetic. And looking now at oil drippage and leakage, I see it leaked out a couple times, a couple spots, nothing major. Seal looks good, so that's good. So there you can see now very minor.